And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, do COVID stimulus checks come in Dogecoin? And how could I get a sleek, lethal cougar to break into my house? And now the podcast host who will gladly apologize to China, but never for his terrible, awful rap album, Pete Dominic.
That's right, Pete Co. You've nailed me again. I stand by the Non-Gangster Chronicles by Pete Dominic. That was a great album. That was fantastic. Thank you, Pete. And thank you for pressing play on Stand Up with Pete Dominic Daily, especially those of you who are subscribers to the podcast. Can't do it without you. Out here in the shed all summer, I'll be pumping out the pods. What? Came up with that branding. Who's writing this stuff? Oh, nobody? I'm just making it up. And I need your support. So go over to patreon.com/Pete Dominic and sign up for a subscription or raise your subscription. I really appreciate it. And I'm hoping to see some of you tonight because it is Thursday and so we hang out. Looking forward to it. Always enjoy myself. Last week was special. We had a lot of laughs, and then at the end, everybody had some very thoughtful parting words at the end of last week's hangout. So we'll try something like that, or not. It doesn't matter. Maybe I'll invite a guest. You never know. 8 p.m. Thursdays, 8 p.m. East. That is, hope to see some new faces and some old faces. And by old faces, I mean Dan McDonald. Guy looks a lot older than he is. Seriously, he's like a graying elf, I think. He's like a shorter, stockier, less handsome Gandalf. Feels so good that he's not here to slam me back in the moment, but I'm hoping he tweets something or he'll fire back when I least expect it. Okay, I like to insult the people who are subscribing to the show and paying my kids to babysit theirs. Because I'm a high-class non-gangster from Bellflower Circle in Onondaga County, New York. All right, now I live in Rockland County, New York. I'm in the shed. It's time to recap the last 24 hours in news. The last 24! Yeah. I need a new jingle. I decided not to go with the beep, boop, boop, because I want even more jingles. The last 24! Yeah, who's recording it for me? Come on. Well, I need a female voice. Let's do it. Let's go. Okay, let's take a look back. Let's start with last night on ABC. I like to start with a laugh, and I can now because I'm getting up early, and the late-night comedians have done their things with all their writers that I don't have. But you know what? Jimmy Kimmel does. And he also has a war with Ted Cruz, which is flared back up. They even played a basketball game, a one-on-one basketball game, where Kimmel lost money for their charity. Anyway, here it is from last night's Jimmy Kimmel Live on ABC.
So last night on the show, I mentioned the fact that Ted Cruz got some flack for being stupid. He mocked an ad for the Army that featured a female soldier who was raised by two moms. He called our military woke and emasculated, which I pointed out fairly, I thought, is funny coming from a guy who let Donald Trump use his testicles on the driving range. And I mean, look, he was Trump's Theon Greyjoy, okay? And I guess that struck a nerve because I'm at home last night watching our guest Lena Waithe's show, and I get a text saying, hey, Teddy Cancun just tweeted about you. He wrote, Jimmy Kimmel Live keeps talking crap. Really tough guy. Here's a reminder. When we played one-on-one, I kicked his ass. He has to live with that forever. Rematch, punk. And he's right. It's true. It's true. I do have to live with that forever. You have to live with being Ted Cruz forever, which is so much worse. But I also have to live with that. So I paused the show, and I was like, all right, what am I going to write back? And it's late, by the way. He should be in bed by now, but this is what he's up doing. He's Googling himself and getting mad. So I wrote back, oh, Ted, you get so sad after you masturbate, which is undoubtedly what he was doing, undoubtedly. Remember that time he accidentally liked a stepmom porno tweet on 9/11 of all days? And then he blamed it on somebody on his staff? That was a tough one. Anyway.
So then Kimmel talks about that basketball game for a couple minutes, which is a crazy thing that happened. And he wraps it up by saying this.
This is the most important part. After you won the game, do you remember what I did? I said, good game, thanks. And I shook your discussing hand. I didn't complain that it was rigged. I didn't ask for a recount on the referee. I didn't start a conspiracy theory about the basketball having a microchip in it. I accepted it. I brought shame on my family, and I embraced it, as I always do. And, I mean, listen, it was a terrible day. I lost a basketball game to a man who ate one of his own boogers during a presidential debate. Anyway, apparently I was mean to Ted, and he's very upset. And if history is any indication, he's so upset, that means he'll be washing my car this weekend. So I look forward to that.
Yes. Well done to the crew over at Jimmy Kimmel Live on ABC. And speaking of comedians, Jon Stewart was back in Washington, D.C., advocating for veterans. I've been talking about burn pits for years. We talked about it with Paul Reichhoff last week. And Jon Stewart is back down in Washington yesterday to continue to put the heat on Congress. A bill has been introduced by Democrats, of course, to support. And I mean, it's bipartisan. It's going to get Republican support. And I think this might actually pass. Well, here's Jon Stewart yesterday in Washington talking about this bill, speaking at a Capitol Hill news conference, arguing that large numbers of veterans are now turning up with breathing problems and cancers that were entirely expected by the federal government, even though the VA is currently denying nearly 80% of claims linked to the toxic exposures of burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. Here's the man who once hired me to be his opening act on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart.
Congress's reticence and inaction has caused our veterans community over these many years to negotiate against itself, to negotiate against the need that they have and the need that their population has against the purse strings that the VA and the Congress were holding over them. And that's why I am finally encouraged, because when we see the hard work that all these VSOs are doing and all these Congress people are doing and the bills that are coming out today and are going to come out of the Senate, that they're finally recognizing that the consequence of war is not another line item in the budget that you can ignore. To put this in the only terms that somebody of my age can understand, defense contractors can't view the U.S. Congress as Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, while veterans are back there like Oliver with a bowl of gruel asking, "Please, sir, may I have some more?" It's bullshit, and it's got to stop.
All right, you know Jon Stewart's going to keep the heat on, and you know they're eventually going to get that passed, but his star power is certainly helpful there and admirable as well. All right, so moving on, I wanted to share another piece, I think, of good news. The principal deputy secretary is a woman named Karine Jean-Pierre. She is a black woman. She identifies as gay, and I should just say that I know her a little bit, and she is really kind and nice and super smart. A lot of people speculate that she would be taking over for Jen Psaki. Well, Jen Psaki needs a day off, or maybe they were getting her ready. Who knows? Who cares? Well, I do. It's important because she was the first black and openly gay, second, I think, black person. Well, listen to the question that she got.
Your presence here today is making history. You are the first black woman to stand behind that podium, speaking on behalf of the president in 30 years. Just wondering if you could share your reflections with us.
Well, thank you for the question. You know, it's a real honor to be standing, to just be standing here today. It doesn't, I appreciate the historic nature. I really do. But I believe that, being behind this podium, being in this room, being in this building is not about one person. It's about, what we do on behalf of the American people. Clearly, the president believes in representation matters, and I appreciate him giving me this opportunity. And it's another reason why I think we are all so proud that this is the most diverse administration in history.
Karine also identifies as gay, so she was the first openly gay spokeswoman and first black woman in decades to address journalists on behalf of the president in the White House briefing room yesterday. So that was cool. Speaking of race, I guess, as a way to pivot, I love Mark Lamont Hill. Big Mark Lamont Hill fan on Twitter at Mark Lamont Hill. He is now an anchor over at Black News Tonight at BNC News is their handle on Twitter. And he had the guy on who's behind the push to get rid of and demonize critical race theory from the Manhattan Institute. His name is Christopher Rufo. I watched a lot of this. It's like 25 minutes. It's super interesting. I highly recommend it. But here is a 2-minute clip where Mark kind of corners, I think, Chris Rufo and asks him, what do you like about being white? And it's a great question, and a question that anybody can try to answer.
And if I were to say to you right now, Christopher, what do you like about being white? What would you say?
I don't know. Again, it's such an amorphous term. It's like a census term or a crude
can you do me a favor? Indulge me for one. We're running out of time. Indulge me for a minute. I understand you see it as all these things, but you surely recognize that the world sees you as white. You know the world reads you as white. And if you were to ask me some things I like about being black, I could talk about cultural norms. I could talk about tradition. I could talk about the kind of commonalities I feel around the diaspora. If I were to ask you what, particularly if you're saying whiteness is a thing that is being constructed as negative and shouldn't be, name something positive that you like about being white.
Well, sure. I'll answer with a thing. There's a lot of documents that are floating around public schools that say things like timeliness, showing up on time, is a white supremacist value or a white dominant value. Things like rationality, things like the Enlightenment, things like objectivity, and these are very strange things to be ascribed to a racial identity. My view is that these are actually should be ascribed to every individual human being. Every individual human being, regardless of whatever racial category we impose on them, has
Christopher, that doesn't answer the question, though. You're telling me you're making straw men about things that are ascribed to whiteness that you think are wrongfully ascribed to whiteness. I'm saying if whiteness isn't a negative thing, and there's something that that whiteness actually shouldn't be constructed as all negative, name something positive about that you believe is positive about being white.
Again, I don't buy into the framework that the world can be reduced into these metaphysical categories of whiteness and blackness. I think that's wrong. I think we should look at people as individuals. I think we should celebrate different people's accomplishments. And again, I think the idea you mentioned Ignatieff. Ignatieff says the goal is to, quote, abolish the white race. In any other context, this would be interpreted as a near genocidal slur. I don't buy into it. The reason I'm not going to answer your question is I reject that categorization. I think of myself as an individual human being with my own capabilities, and I would hope that we could both judge each other as individuals and come to common values on that basis.
Fair enough. I would argue, though, that the ability to say, I don't see race, I don't...
All right, well, there's a lot more to it. I can't play the whole thing for you, but go over to Black News tonight at BNC News to watch it if you're more interested in it. I think the best thing about being white, what I'm happiest about, is water skiing, I would have to say. Now, I mean, you can always compare the differences in black culture and white culture, but what is white culture anyway but a whole bunch of different types of white folks, Irish and Italian, Catholic, WASPs, evangelical, rural, rednecky, goofy, backwater. I mean, I don't know. What does it mean? Maybe that's something we could talk about at tonight's Hangout. I hope you'll join me at 8 p.m. East with usually over 40 of us hanging out, shooting the shit. Always fun. Now, the biggest story yesterday, I didn't lead with it on purpose, was the horrific shooting yesterday in California, where 9 people, apparently including the shooter himself, were killed. A California transit worker who once told his ex-wife he hates the people that he works with and wishes he could kill them or something like that. This is in Santa Clara, California. The victims appeared to be all men and ranged in between 29 and 63. Authorities didn't release the gunman's name or age, and even if they did, I wouldn't say it here on the show, but apparently he's a 57-year-old guy, a maintenance worker at the yard, so worker-related it would seem somehow. You know, I just had Shannon Watts on the program this week from Mom's Demand, and she's so good on Twitter, and she tweeted yesterday shortly after, "Never forget that the gun lobby and its allies want us to get used to the shooting tragedies. They want us to see 100 dead and 230 wounded every day as normal, as simply the price of living in America. They want us to be numb and to be fearful, to buy more guns." Here's Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, at the press conference yesterday.
Thank the sheriff, the mayor, our police chief, captain, all the men and women in uniform. You're going to learn over the course of the next number of days and weeks about the heroism of the San Jose police saved lives, deputy sheriffs that quite literally ran seconds after hearing about this incident without any consideration of their own lives, and did an extraordinary job to save other people's lives. That said, there's a numbness I imagine some of us are feeling about this, because there's a sameness to this. Anywhere USA. It just feels like this happens over and over and over again. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. It wasn't that long ago I was standing out here talking about the tragic loss of two children, one in a mother's arms, the Gilroy Festival, just here in this community, down in Southern California, down in San Bernardino. I remember a few years prior in Santa Barbara. Pick a state. And here we are in the United States of America. We're experiencing something just is not experienced anywhere else in the world. There's a sameness to this. And that numbness, I think, is something we're all feeling. All of us gathered here today, looking at this scene, listening to governors, mayors, chiefs, speaking similar tone and terms, expression of condolences, all the right emotions and perhaps the right words, but it begs the damn question, what the hell is going on in the United States of America? What the hell is wrong with us? And when are we going to come to grips with this? When are we going to put down our arms, literally and figuratively, our politics, stale rhetoric, finger-pointing, all a hand-wringing consternation that produces nothing except more fury and frustration, more scenes like this repeated over and over and over again. I say that not as a governor. I just say that as a father of four. I say that as a member of this community who cares deeply about it. Thank you.
All right, Gavin Newsom yesterday in California where this shooting occurred, and in Texas where they're trying to, the governor there has a completely different take on guns. He wants everybody to be armed to the teeth. Nothing is too much for the Texas gun folks. Give the kindergartners pistols. Let's go. Well, guess what? Yesterday in Texas, a man was apparently suicidal, and so 3 Texas police officers showed up at his house, and the man shot them. Yeah, the headline is 3 officers wounded, homes evacuated during standoff in Flower Mound, which is the name of a community in Texas, in North Texas, I think. And I only learned about that story because of Shannon Watt's Twitter feed, and she tweets about all the gun violence, suicide, homicide, domestic violence against police officers, against black folks, whoever it is. She's always tweeting about it, and you should follow her there. And if you haven't heard my interview with her on the podcast 2 episodes ago, then check it out. And yesterday, President Obama sent a video to the My Brother's Keeper Alliance that supports boys and young men of color, MBK Rising, it's called. And it's a 2-day series of workshops aimed at finding solutions to the many obstacles many young men and boys of color face. Kicked off with a day of service. And here is President Obama yesterday from that forum, where he opened virtually saying he wished he could be in person, and he told all these guys, young black folks, young black men, and predominantly, I think, that are involved there, to get vaccinated. He opened with a public health message.
I wish that I could see everybody in person. It reminds me that at the top, I want to say that my hope is the next time the MBK communities across the country convene, we can do it in person. That in part depends on us making sure that all our communities, but particularly communities of color that have been disproportionately affected by COVID, that we all get vaccinated. And so I don't want to start with a public health message, but this is something that is deeply important to me. I've been going around the country letting folks know that this vaccine is safe, it is effective, and our communities in particular have to make sure that that we take advantage of something that, by the way, was developed in concert with, as opposed to just provided to communities of color. You have outstanding doctors and health professionals from the start who are involved in getting the breakthroughs that are allowing us to be safe and be with our families once again and hopefully get rid of the scourge of this disease.
Obama at some point also warned that you got to maintain power in Congress, or it's very difficult to get things done. Of course, he lost the House 2 years in, as most presidents do. And so he is, I think, in pretty much every appearance trying to get people up and involved and do whatever we can to keep our House majority so that fascists don't take over and just get rid of elections altogether.
Because keep in mind, in 2012, I won, but I didn't win Congress back. And we didn't win a bunch of governorships back. And we didn't win a bunch of state legislatures back. And so all the reform initiatives that we were coming up with and the ideas that had been generated, we weren't able to translate into as bold a set of initiatives as I would want it, because we just couldn't get it through a legislature that was opposed.
All right, so that's the last 24-hour in sound, according to me, with what I've seen. If you've got something that you want people to hear, you can always send it to me anytime during the day. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Send your audio links there, and I'll take a look, because I'm doing a pretty good job of scanning the news every day, but I can always use more eyes and ears, because I hate missing things that are relevant to what we care and talk about here on this daily program. But now it's time to get to all the other headlines that don't have too much to say about or sound for. It's the news dump, everything else. Back to you, Pete Co.
Ravenous raccoon inside steals your baby's lunch. It's got your father cornered on today's news dump.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the raccoon news dump jingle, because yesterday I saw a raccoon outside the shed here as I was doing the news, as a matter of fact, and I ran out and I started yelling at it, and it just looked at me. It's like, what? This raccoon just looked at me. Just stopped and looked at me. It wasn't startled. It just looked up. It's like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, get out of here. This is my place. It's like, this is your place. This is Earth. I'm like, well, it's my little tiny part of Earth, and I don't want you on it because I've got a garden, and you're going to find out about it, and you're going to eat everything I've been laboring for, and it's not for you. You can eat anything, and I prefer tomatoes. And he's like, calm down. I'll leave. By the way, my name is Steven. I was like, what? He's like, you called me raccoon. I said, I did? He's like, yeah, you yelled raccoon. I have a name. And then he just left. And then I look at the other side of the shed. I have two windows on either side because that's how I designed it. And there he was coming in on the other side. He came in on the other side of the fence, and he was back, and I just started yelling at him again. I was like, what are you doing, Steven? He's like, why are you calling me Steven? I was like, what? He's like, that's not my name. I'm Richard. I'm like, what is happening? Anyway, that did happen yesterday, word for word. But that's just my own little world in the shed. Here's what happened in the wider world yesterday. A tough day for big oil. A lot of great reporting on this. But I'll just read a tweet from environmentalist and writer Bill McKibben, who wrote, an utterly crushing day for big oil. Chevron investors demanded emission cuts. Number 2, Dutch court told Shell to cut emissions by half. And number 3, Exxon shareholders bucked the company and elected directors demanding climate action. And then he finished that tweet by saying, thanks to all who fight, you push long enough and dominoes tumble. And though, speaking of oil, because we don't want to burn it anymore, the oil companies want to make sure they maintain it as an ingredient in other things that we love to use every day for 10 seconds. And one of those things is plastic, single-use plastic. Well, plastic in general, the main ingredient is petroleum. And yesterday, Amazon shareholders took to a vote to whether to reveal plastic pollution the company produces. The Amazon board of directors, of course, recommended shareholders vote against the proposal. Unbelievable. A report by Oceana, which is a conservation group, estimated last year Amazon produced 465 million pounds of plastic pollution. That included enough plastic air pillows and package that could wrap around the earth 500 times. You know those things? Ooh, I can't believe how much we get in the mail, including from Amazon. I'm feeling horrific about that right now. Can we just buy used things for everything? All right, I don't want to get started on an anti-plastic rant right here in the news dump. There are other stories out there, including that the Attorney General in Oklahoma has resigned following news of his divorce and alleged affair. In a statement from his office, Oklahoma Attorney General Mike Hunter said effective June 1, he'd be resigning as certain personal matters that are becoming public will become a distraction for this office. One of the most important positions in state government, according to him. He said, I cannot allow a personal issue to overshadow the vital work the attorneys, agents, and support staff do on behalf of Oklahomans. Bye-bye, Mike Hunter. I don't think an affair should ruin your career or your life, but it's important, I think, to just know when it happens, especially when it's a job as important as the one in Oklahoma. Oh, here's some good news. Yesterday I mentioned the river otter that conservationists thought was pretty much extinct. Well, now a giant tortoise has been found in the Galapagos, and scientists thought that was extinct as well. So I'm very happy to be able to report that. New polling says most Republicans want Trump to run for the White House in 2024. That's not surprising. What's a little more surprising, but not that surprising, is 2/3 of Republicans also think Joe Biden's victory was not legitimate. And I'm not sure the percentage, but a frighteningly large percentage of Republicans actually think Trump is still the president. I don't know if that means they think he's still in the White House, but some of them, a smaller majority, I'm sure, smaller percentage, I'm sure, do believe that. And speaking of Republicans, the old school Republicans, and I mean really old school, he was 94. John Warner, longtime Republican senator of Virginia, passed away yesterday. Did you know that he was once the Navy secretary between 1972 and 1974? But more importantly, he was once married to Elizabeth Taylor. And he looked like a bird of prey. I just want to mention that as well. John Warner, dead at age 94. Pennsylvania became the 10th state to hit Joe Biden's vaccine goal yesterday. North Dakota GOP legislatures want health officials to stop telling people about the vaccines. That's right. You heard it right. In North Dakota, Republican policymakers, lawmakers, legislators want health officials to stop telling residents about public health, about the most miraculous vaccine we've ever created. They want them to stop talking about it. And I just heard this here at the end. Ellen DeGeneres' daytime slot is now open. Guess who's taking it? Kelly Clarkson, the singer, American Idol winner. Did she win? I don't know, but I wonder if she'll be mean like Ellen DeGeneres. I really don't know or care what happened there that much. Ohio is set to announce the first Vaccinian Winners. I hope it's a Stand Up with Pete Dominic listener. The $1 million prize is for vaccinated Ohioans 18 and older, and younger residents are now eligible for college scholarship, and winners are going to be revealed each Wednesday through June. And now the governor of New York is doing something similar to incentivize young people to get vaxxed, and specifically those parents of young people that are concerned, because I think the young people want to get vaxxed. He announced that any state resident between ages of 12 and 17 who gets a first dose of the Pfizer vaccine starting on Thursday would be entered into a raffle to win a full ride scholarship to a New York public university. So we're entering Ava, who's already gotten vaccinated, and soon Julia as well. That is a very good incentive, because we're looking at college, the cost of college right now. And from what I'm making on the podcast, what Val and I are making together, it is going to be tough. So I'm going to need 1,000 more subscribers. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic if you want to help send my kids to college. Or hire my wife, hire Valerie. All right, that is it for today's news dump. Okay, now it is time to get to the guest interviews. I have two great interviews today. I think, if I do say so myself, they're both around 40, 45 minutes, I think. I talked with Bill Boyle, Bill B in D.C., history, politics, geopolitics, domestic policy, foreign policy, history. He mentioned the Byzantine Empire at one point. He's always fun to talk to. Such a smart, thoughtful, well-read guy. Also, of course, a longtime listener, supporter, and former caller to the live show, and I miss having his calls, so I just reach out to him and I call him and I record it, and that's coming up. But first, Big Barry Ritholtz and I had a great conversation 2 days ago, and I think you're really going to like what we covered today, from the microchip shortage to cryptocurrency to minimum wage and government economic stimuluses, a little politics, and probably something about him redesigning his kitchen. Here now is my conversation with Barry Ritholtz on Twitter at Ritholtz. Go to the Big Picture blog, get his book, listen to his podcast, Masters in Business. Here we go. Well, what is going on with this microchip shortage, and what other market? It affects every market, I would imagine. But
so let's back up a bit.
Car sitch.
when everything shut down in March and April of 2020, you know, when you flick a switch, the light goes off. When you turn it back on, the electricity flows and the light goes back on. The supply chain and the logistics behind it are more complicated than that, especially with complex products. So to make a microchip, to make the brains behind some computing device or aspect of a device, there's a series of steps that have to come together with the right equipment and the right materials being in the same place at the right time with the appropriate folks. It's not like flicking on a switch. It's a little bit of an ordeal. And you had a lot of these places. Listen, when China first started getting COVID, they would lock towns down. They would, you know, seal up apartment buildings. They were like no bullshit. There were no whiny bitches going, I don't want to wear a mask. There was none of that crazy nonsense that we see in the United States. They were like, fuck you, we're welding your apartment door shut. We'll let you know when it's safe to come out. And I'm not exaggerating.
No, they put people in mandatory quarantine in hotels.
It was like, this city is now...
They would bang a drum. They said, we'll bang a drum when it's time to come out.
Right. No, but nobody leaves. And, you know, if you caught leaving the city, you'll be shot. They don't screw around.
Right. You're not endorsing that, but you're saying
we are really... We have forgotten the ability to deal with discomfort and pain, and we've lost that. We've become soft as a nation.
Well, I don't disagree, but you're also talking about taking my freedom and liberty, and this is America.
So, first of all, I don't have the freedom to have 8 shots of tequila and then get in my car and drive as fast as I can on the highway. You're not taking my freedom away. You're protecting other people from my recklessness. I don't think I really need to work hard to demonstrate to people that here's the deal. If you don't, now we're no longer masking. I'm talking about last year. But in the midst of it, here's the deal. If you want to come into this store without a mask for the rest of your life, anytime there's a medical procedure, a doctor, a surgery, everybody comes in, nobody wears masks. And we're going to bring you in surgeon spittle to operate on you. Would you be comfortable with that? Oh, you wouldn't? Well, then fuck you, put on a mask. This isn't a debate. Now we've reached the point where infections are down 89% and you don't need masks outdoors. And it's arguable whether you really need masks indoors. But hold that aside. The various jerks out there who are insisting that I'm free to infect everybody around me if I have COVID, I'm sorry, but you don't have the freedom to murder people around you, to drive drunk, or to be a risk to your community.
Well, about 4 minutes ago, I asked you about microchips and automobiles. You took me to China, and then
China doesn't screw around. When they close stuff down, they lock down hard for a number of months. And then when it became time to reopen, it's not, all right, we were closed for 3 months and now we're 3 months behind. It takes weeks and weeks. It's like, it's not the same as building a new plant, but they're getting a semiconductor plant up to speed is something that takes a long time. And so let's say it's 2, 3, 4 months. So you lock down 3 or 4 months. So now you're like a solid 10 months, 8-10 months behind. And, you're still having sporadic problems getting certain equipment.
So what percentage of the microchips are made in China? What are the raw materials? What's the chain of custody? And why don't we build our own microchip plants and antibiotics making plants and other things we don't have to rely on China, who we're not going to have a great relationship with moving forward?
So the concept of a homeostatic system is that when something goes too far one way, it swings back the other way. And so it was cheaper to have stuff made in China. So we outsourced a lot of stuff to China. And we used to make semiconductors. In fact, semiconductors were effectively invented here. And the United States dominated the manufacture of this. Fairchild, National Semi, Intel, go down AMD, go down the whole list. But eventually we figured out that it was more efficient for companies like Apple to design the chips here and then outsource the manufacturing of those chips to dedicated fabs in Taiwan and China and elsewhere. So that's all great until there's a pandemic, and then you need to ramp this up, and you realize, oh, wow, we used to make 80% of the semiconductors in the world, and now we make 12%. So they just started working on a new chip plant in Texas and in Arizona, and so we'll probably go from 12% to 14 or 15%. But it's just still way too inexpensive to make it here, so they try and make it elsewhere.
All right. So what does it mean for the car market, the automobile market, and other technology, phones and
Sure,
computers? And does it all come back? I mean, how far ahead are you looking on?
Yeah, it comes back in a year or so. So keep in mind.
So don't buy a car right now.
So the second biggest consumer product that is a consumer of semiconductor chips are automobiles. Automobiles are essentially rolling computers. And in fact, think about everything that you do in a car that is computer controlled. ABS is a chip. Your whole center stack in your dashboard, your navigation is a set of chips and access to data. Just go through all half the engine control is a chip. If you want a sunroof, there's a dedicated chip that runs that. In fact, a number of car manufacturers are now making cars no sunroofs. It's just easier because they don't need that chip. The whole thing is kind of crazy.
All right, so that's one big question I wanted to ask you about microchips. Anything else we need to know about microchips before I move on to cryptocurrency?
You know, we focus on the software, we focus on the apps and all those things, but you know, and the interface is always software, but we forget how much semiconductors are driving everything we do, from phones to computers to, cars to television, your flat screen, smart television, the app that you use to the little. So I use the Amazon Fire Stick for my Netflix and Amazon Prime. Yeah, I used to use Apple TV, but Amazon just was so much better. I like the interface better. I like the microphone better. So I switched, probably about 3, 4, 5 years ago. And, that's just a communications processor and a chip on that stick that plugs into that little dongle. So, I mean, it's hard to think of. You have a Kindle, there's a semiconductors in that. You have an iPod, you have a phone, you like whatever, anything that's electronic. That's before we start talking about EVs and electric cars. I mean, everything in that is controlled by semiconductors. So when semiconductor production slows down, it puts all those goods on a slow roll. And, I keep hearing about companies like GM and Ford prioritizing their highest profit vehicles, which turn out to be big SUVs and pickup trucks, which means the semiconductor shortage is bad for the environment.
Yeah, well, that's one way of looking at it. Speaking of EVs, I wonder if you've read anything or heard anything or think anything about the future of the batteries that power them, specifically lithium, I think.
Yeah. So lithium is... so the technology keeps adapting and changing and getting better. If you ever used a cordless screwdriver or a drill or any of those things, or a leaf blower or any electric rechargeable tool, you know that over the past 10 years the differences are just amazing. Like, I can take a lithium battery screwdriver and or drill and charge it, and that charge lasts like a year. I mean, they're just professional grade
clearly
stuff.
You're not putting together a lot. You're not doing what I'm doing. I mean, you're maybe a IKEA bookcase versus my deck.
The old days, you would charge a drill, electric screwdriver or a electric drill, and you get a couple hours use out of it. Now it's like 20 hours of, it takes it's hard to blow through that charge. It really
I've had the lithium powered lawnmower and weed whacker and blower for a few years now, and I wonder, I need a new battery. And I wonder
huge
how
difference.
I wonder how much better it'll be.
So I don't know if the battery that you have to replace that with is the same 5-year-old battery, but just a new one.
Yeah, no, it's
or
just
if
a new
all
one.
the benefits of the upgrade go to it. I would imagine that all the software and the management of that device would have to be upgraded also.
Oh.
So it might be worth swapping that out for a brand new one, or you could just get a new battery and keep it going. P.S. In a lot of these tools, the battery is the most expensive part.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the
And-
batteries
and
are
so-
like $300-400.
So if you've noticed, if you look at different Porter or Milwaukee, or I'm trying to think of some of the other brand names that have done this, that they have a variety of different tools that you can run off the same shape battery.
DeWalt,
And
Black & Decker.
DeWalt was the one I was thinking about.
Ryobi. Yep. I can name all the tools.
Right, that's right.
Such a
Ryobi is
man.
the Home Depot house brand.
Is that right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, and they're actually pretty good. But these things, you know, it's the improvement is gradual, and you may not notice it from week to week, month to month. But suddenly, a few years go by, and you're like, Jesus, when was the last time I use my drill gun all the time, right? So this summer, we're doing a whole bunch of planters outside, and they're all plastic, and you should have some holes in the bottom.
Yeah.
And I must have drilled like 24,
That
planters. Yeah. We have a bunch of little pots and a bunch of little things. I'm like trying to remember, like, when did I recharge this gun last? And it's like, I think it was Christmas I plugged it in.
Well, to be fair, you're only
they're
punching
just
a
really,
few holes
really
of plastic. But the bottom line is the batteries are getting better. The technology is getting better. That means better things for cars and vehicles and planes
Yes,
and
yes.
boats and certainly home power.
I
to be able
just
to
got
store-
a press release today about this new electric boat motor. Meaning that you bring it to marina, you plug it in, you let it charge up, and you go out for a day of fun.
That
which
sounds
is
fun.
Unthinkable.
Yeah. I just hate dealing with, like, putting aside pollution and climate change. I hate dealing with gas and oil. I don't like it. I had to use a chainsaw a couple weeks ago, and it was, you got to mix up the gas and the oil, and certainly it's powerful. They're still more powerful. I was reading about the new F-150. Apparently it can't push snow. It's the electric pickup.
I have not heard that. They have the ability, depending on which model you get, to tow either 7,500 pounds or 10,000 pounds.
I feel like there was a controversy, like they were criticizing it because Joe Biden was driving it around, threatening to hit reporters.
I'm going to tell you, I'm not.
You think I could push snow?
I haven't heard that, but to be really blunt, it sounds like a bunch of bullshit to me. If you could tow a 10,000 pound load behind you, why can't you push some snow?
I'm going to
have to go to Google to that.
I'm going to go
Ford
I'm looking to Google
150
too.
Lightning
electric
snow. Well, electric is the Lightning is the electric. Ford 150 adds snowplow prep option for all style cabs. Let's see if there's any news about this. Ford betting big. The pickup will be able to travel up to 300 miles, plow snow in the winter. Let's see what it says about that. Snow. Now, I do know that in cold weather, you lose a lot of range with EVs. Maybe it's that. Ford may have a hard time selling it to people who build houses, maintain lawns, or plow snow. It sounds good, but it's not good for the type of business in. Says Jimmy Williams, owner of a landscaping firm on the Chicago South Side.
Oh, well, that's all they're quoting is Jimmy Williams. I don't know.
He doesn't think the battery will have enough range to last the 12
Well, what
to
the hell
14
does Jimmy
hours.
Williams know?
He'll stick
Who's
with
your
his
source?
3 gas-powered because he plows snow in the winter.
You would have taught me not to trust this source that you just looked up.
I don't. I'm not so sure that this is.
Well, let me move off cars and semiconductors and ask you about something else that has been getting more attention in the last few weeks or even months than any other time, which is cryptocurrency. I know nothing about it. I want to know nothing about it. What are investors asking you? How much of an issue is it? And didn't it just completely bottom out?
Well, so first, people have been describing cryptocurrencies as if it's an independent asset class. And I have been trying to tell people, think of crypto like one big giant company, right? Apple has a $2 trillion market cap, Amazon is like 1.8. Microsoft is right there, like $1 trillion something. You add up all the value of all the cryptos, and they're, one of those giant tech companies. So I'm not quite sure that it's a independent asset class. I'm not quite, Paul Krugman had a really interesting column last week that said, so what's the use case for crypto other than, something to trade? What does it do? The blockchain has been around more than a dozen years. It normally doesn't take that long for a innovative technology to get worked its way into the financial services industry. If this is really faster, better, cheaper, and accomplishes something, why aren't we seeing it in our everyday life? It's people have described crypto as a medium of exchange, but it's not, because I can't go buy my lunch with it somewhere. And people have described it as a store of value, but anything that swings up and down 30% on Elon Musk's tweets, that's not a good store of value. So my key takeaway of this is there's something really interesting there. And I wrote something up a couple of weeks ago about if we were to put concert tickets on the blockchain, that would give the artist the control not only of the sale of the tickets, but of the resale. You wouldn't be able to sell it without their permission. And so you take out the middlemen, you take out StubHub and all those other weasels. And you could price, I'll send you this because I think it's kind of fascinating. You could price tickets at a variety of different prices and different ways that is fairer to the person who attends it, the hardcore fan, as well as the artist. Right now, there are third parties who are basically rentiers making money, and a lot of money, on somebody else's work product. And the ability to say, hey, if you're going to buy Hamilton tickets for $1,000, well, then rather than it going to Ticketmaster or StubHub, it should go to Lin-Manuel Miranda, or at least the markup. And so that's like one use case. Smart contracts like that are a use case. But that's the blockchain. That is not the various coins. And so you have a lot of coins that go up and down, and there seem to be pure speculation. People buy them because they think they're going higher. As opposed to when I buy Amazon, it's because I'm expecting that future cash flow that comes from that company to continue going higher. So I have some fundamental basis for making that assessment. When you buy a coin, you're basically saying, well, the dollar is going away and this is going to replace fiat currency. And so that's kind of a narrative. That's kind of a story. I have yet to find the crypto story compelling, but I will tell you, there are a bunch of people who made a shit ton of money on it. And anytime somebody makes that much money, I got to pay attention to it. So this was almost Bitcoin was almost $60,000 not too long ago. I mean, like a month ago. Today it's $37,500.
So there's a shitload of people who also lost a lot of money.
Well, if you're late to the party, I'm fond of saying last man in pays for beer. And when you're chasing a stock that has run up from essentially nothing to 60,000, the upside at hundreds of dollars or even $5,000 seems ridiculous. I mean, every level people have been forecasting 10x and 100x returns. And so far, some of them have been right. I've heard 500,000. I haven't heard an explanation from anybody making that forecast as to the fundamental basis for why Bitcoin is worth $500,000 per coin. When to get a coin, you have to solve a mathematical problem that consumes a lot of computing power, but doesn't solve any real life
and that's
when
it's an energy issue. It's a climate. What's his name? Elon Musk just said we're no longer going to take Bitcoin because it's bad for energy. It wastes energy.
So here's the problem with that. That's been well known from day one. Yeah. And I got to imagine a guy who has a rocket ship company and an electric car company is aware of that. So I kind of look at that and like, what sort of bullshit is this? Of course this is a giant polluter. We've known that since day one.
I still don't know what it is, and I still don't want to care about it. And I just want to say, we're never talking about
anything that's new and worth $2 trillion. That's always a good thing to do. Listen, I feel intrigued and fascinated by something like this. What I'm mostly intrigued about this is a pet theory I've been nursing, which crypto plays right into, which is the whole world is narrative. Everything is narrative. The stock market is narrative. Everything
COVID
is a story. And when I mentioned 5 minutes ago about the fundamentals of a company, that's a story also. It's choose your narrative. Which story do you wish to believe?
The Trump organization.
If you wish to believe that a company that is sending goods and products all over the world, all over the U.S., and are doing all these things, and therefore they're going to continue to see revenue go up and profits go up, and therefore I want to own that. That's one narrative. Another narrative is this sort of coin is going to eventually replace cash dollars and fiat currency, and so that's why I want to own that. Pick your narrative.
Which one are you picking on this?
I look at this as a big random company that has just gotten bigger. Mm-hmm. So Bitcoin to me is another Microsoft, only without the tech support problems. And although they have their own, people lose their passwords, they lose their access to money. Somewhere about between 20 and 25% of all mined coins have been lost due to lost passwords or damaged hardware.
Wow.
So like I kind of look at that and say, that's a little disturbing. That's definitely a little disturbing. So I'm intrigued, but I'm not a buyer of Bitcoin for our clients because there currently isn't a safe way to hold it, right? There isn't a secure way to hold it without a risk of losing a password, without a risk. Hey, remember Mt. Gox? They got into trouble. They were hacked. A number of these Bitcoin purses and wallets have been hacked. Purses, where did that come from? The Bitcoin online e-wallets have been hacked. And so, it's almost there. It's not quite ready for prime time. And by the time it's ready for prime time, all the easy money will have been made and it just becomes another giant thing. So,
all right, let me ask you this then. You have a great blog post from May 12th at thebigpicture, Is it inflation or partisan politics? You write in this piece, I don't want to get all political on you, but it sure looks like a funny coincidence that so many see inflation only when a Democrat is in the White House, are blind to it when a Republican holds that office. We can talk. We could say the same about the debt and the debt ceiling and debates about spending. But this is a great post because you have 5 different time periods that you lay out here: post World War II, 1970s to 82, pre-global financial crisis, so that'd be 2000 to 2008, post GFC, 2009 to 16. Then 2017 to 20, that's during the last 3 years. Well, that's the Trump administration. And now 2021 to present. And you lay it out. It's a great post, and it's important because it's really one of the they focus group this. I don't know if you've heard about this, but Republicans have focus group this, and it's working. It always works, I think, but they're using the inflation word a lot. Plus, people are seeing prices going up on things.
Yeah. So prices are going up for a couple of reasons. First, I've showed this chart before, but when you look at retail sales during the pandemic, they plunged in February, March, and they recovered. And by April, they were already over and above where they were pre-pandemic. Why is that? People began to stock up on goods and things. They started to load up. I bought a freezer. I thought, I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but I'm going to buy a freezer. So when I see something I want, I could throw 100 hamburgers in the freezer and, grill the rest of the month. We were also going to start right before the financial crisis. Before the pandemic lockdown, we were supposed to start working on renovating our kitchen. Thank goodness the contractor didn't do demo the week we were scheduled to, because we would have began the lockdown without a kitchen.
I'm sure that happened someplace, somewhere, yeah.
That would have been a nightmare. So So there was that, and then the fact that everybody is stuck at home and all of their usual expenses like travel and entertainment and commuting and dry cleaning, all that stuff, it stopped, and they had nothing to do but entertain themselves. So they bought TVs and they bought games, and just like all this, I got 3 screaming kids in the house, and what am I going to do to shut them up? So they bought laptops. People had to set up home offices, and so retail sales did really well. Now we're seeing spot shortages, not just semiconductors, but lumber is an example. We had a giant shortage of single-family home construction following the financial crisis because we overbuilt in 05 to 04 to 08, let's call it. We overbuilt everything. We built too many of those houses. And in response, after the crisis, all the home builders started building multifamily rental units and stopped. I threw a chart up on the post. No, it's not a housing bubble, showing not only is the least amount of homes for sale that we've ever had, that naturally sends prices higher, but the construction of homes just has been dramatically lagging and is going to take years to catch up. P.S. Everybody's trying to build as many homes now as they can. So we went from too many in the early 2000s, a dearth over the next decade, and now we're making up for lost time. Spot shortages and not only is there giant lumber construction, but there is this pine beetle that's killing a lot of the forests in Canada where a lot of the lumber's coming from. So you have physical shortages, you have spot shortages, and you don't have enough mills. And nobody wants to build a mill that won't be ready for 18 months. This will be, this spot shortage will have passed by then. In fact, lumber prices, which doubled, have already dropped 27%. So the worst of that's probably behind us. I just wrote something which hasn't come out yet on Bloomberg. It should be out towards the end of the week, that I think we're going through a great reset. And I believe that this is very parallel to the period immediately after World War II. Here's what you had. You had spot shortages of supplies, of key commodities. They couldn't get enough. Employers complained they were having a hard time filling jobs, both skilled and unskilled. There was a giant housing shortage as all these GIs returned back from school. The transition from wartime to civilian footing really threw a monkey wrench into manufacturers and offices. It was just a really challenging thing. We saw very high spikes of inflation that was transitory, meaning it passed, and it sort of rolled through different sectors as different parts of the economy came on. Speak to somebody who owns a restaurant or a bar. They can't find staff. They can't get help because, who wants a low-paying job where the bonus is that you could get COVID from the public? So you're going through all these things on top of everything else, and this is kind of intriguing. When you look at the minimum wage, and I've been writing about this for as long as you know me.
This was the big last thing I was gonna ask you about if we had time. So
let's jump right to that.
Yeah, you have a great post, employment inflation quiz, which is really, really great. You wrote all the questions for me here, but what do you want to say?
So essentially, when you look at minimum wages against just about any measure, it's lagged. It's lagged against inflation. If go back to 1966, if minimum wage kept up with inflation, it'd be, depending on which measure you use, back then it was like $1.25 or $1.50. It should be like $11 now. If you measured it against productivity, it should be something like $16 or $18 now, maybe even $20. Measured against corporate profits, it's way higher. And then finally measured against C-suite compensation of executives, and it should be $30 an hour. So no matter how you look at it, wages have been lagging, and now you're seeing a big catch up. P.S. We've started to see signs of this in 2015, 16, 17. I wrote about it then. Hey, you're not, and I wrote this in the piece, which you haven't mentioned, which is, if you want to hire people, if you're having difficulty hiring people, then it's time to raise wages. And this is simply supply and demand. This isn't complicated economics. We can't find people. Well, there's tens of millions of people looking for a job. You can't find people at $8 an hour. Raise your salary. Well, we have to compete with unemployment, they say. And the answer is you're not competing with unemployment. You're competing with other employers like Costco or Trader Joe's or even Starbucks, who figured out, hey, if we pay $15, $16, not only do we get good employees, but our massive turnover costs and our massive hiring and retention costs get cut down dramatically. When you look at brands like Walmart and McDonald's, they're perennially hiring. They're always hiring. Why is that? Because they can't seem to retain people. Well, why is that? Well, part of it is the work sucks. Okay, but I get that. I worked at McDonald's for a weekend in high school, and I don't think I've eaten McDonald's ever since.
Really? Oh, boy.
I mean, I would go to Wendy's or Five Guys or stuff like that, but
you found out
I don't know if I'm trying to remember if I might have had it once in the ensuing 100 years. But but the other thing is you got to pay people. It's like, wait, I got to put up with abuse and fry greasy burgers and do all this shit for $7 an hour? Right. It's not worth it.
Well, you're seeing a whole bunch of Republicans, again, blaming unemployment or any kind of aid because of the pandemic that's been given out. And now some of them are just turning away free money because they say people aren't going back to work because they're getting paid more from the government handout or whatever they want to call it than they would working these jobs. And my one response to that is, well, a lot of people are having to stay home with their kids, and to go back to a crappy job, they'd have to pay for child care of some sort, and they would barely break even. So why would you go back to work if your kid can't go back to school? That's one category of people.
That's a factor. So I've been, every time I have anybody come to the house, I ask them questions. So the guy who turns the sprinklers on in the beginning, the town makes you do a pressure check so you're not leaking water out and wasting water. That's a regulation in Nassau County, and it's actually a good one because you don't want to just... What's that?
Saves taxpayers money if you don't waste water.
Saves money, saves water, saves everybody everything. So I go, how's work been? How you guys doing? He's like, I could use a little more staff. I'm having a hard time finding people. And I go, why is that? He blames unemployment. I said, what about the exact issue you raised? What about child care? He goes, I don't know. I never had a problem before. So that's one argument.
Your kids were in school.
So that's the other thing is that, there's a chicken and egg issue here so New York City just announced in September, no remote learning, everybody back in school, not hybrid 100%. And I think a good part of the motivation for that is the childcare aspect of it. That's how people get back to work, is when they're no longer stuck home having to do childcare every day.
How big of a danger is inflation today?
My opinion is I think that we're in the process of resetting a series of prices higher, not the sort of persistent continual inflation like we saw in the decades of the 70s, where your purchasing power went down and everything went up in price. Look, we know healthcare has done nothing but go up, and we know that college costs have done nothing but go up for the past 40 years. Hold those two aside. I think what we're seeing now, I think the dominant force over the past 30 years has been deflation. You have a global labor arbitrage. You have the digitalization of a lot of things that used to be manual. That's amazing. I'm watching this little thing float by, and I'm seeing it on the screen. I don't know if you saw that. It's just a tiny little wisp of a puffy whatever. So anyway, that was just really strange to see on the screen and in the window at the same time. What's that?
Are you high?
No, I'm not. I'm totally sober. So you're going to see, you can edit that out. So you're going to see the lower end wages go up. The $15 an hour, concept that a lot of people thought was so outrageous. I think people are starting to get used to it. They're wrapping their head around it. And if McDonald's costs 50 cents more for a Happy Meal, All right, so it's that many fewer diabetic amputations in the future. It's not the worst thing in the world that, and this was always my big beef with Walmart and McDonald's. Don't price your wages so low so that you as a public company have your employees on the public dole subsidizing your labor force. So that's, to me, the reason to raise minimum wage to $12
how
at
come
least.
some companies, this is another question from your blog that you wrote for me, for everybody. How come some companies, Costco, Trader Joe's, Target, Starbucks, et cetera, have been willing to pay higher wages than their competitors like Walmart and
Because
McDonald's?
they figured out that, when you're a multi-billion-dollar company doing billions and billions of dollars a year in revenue, and you look at how many employees you have, I think Target has like 100,000 employees, something like that. The cost is relatively modest to the upside of it. I mean, I don't know how many. Let's see. Target is the 8th largest retailer in the United States, according to Wikipedia, and they do $75 billion a year in revenues, and they have 360,000 employees in 1,800 stores. So it's not nothing to take the bottom of that group from $10 to $12 or from $12 to $14. But if you have to fill 360,000 slots, think about how expensive that is in terms of retention and human resources. And every time you get a new employee in, you have to train them and you have to. So somebody at Target figured out, hey, you know what's more expensive than paying this guy $14 instead of $12? Having to replace them every 3 months. And so someone there has done the math. Now, Walmart is behind, but they're starting to figure it out. They're so giant and have so many people that, every penny makes a difference. So they haven't fully embraced this. Trader Joe's is notorious for taking really good care of their staff. And they're also have an incredible customer loyalty. I don't think that's a coincidence. And the same thing is happening at places like Costco. Costco has like an incredibly loyal customer base and very low turnover. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And so when we look at all these companies that have started raising wages, and they all started, Target and Trader Joe's and Costco have been paying above average wages relative to their peers for a decade at least. These are some of the best run, most profitable retailers in the country. So they seem to have figured it out. Now, can you raise wages like that if you're inefficient, if you're unproductive, if you don't have products that the retail buying shoppers want? Well, no, doesn't matter what you pay people. You're screwed at that point. But it just seems to me that the better run companies have figured out, hey, we don't need to impoverish our staff. Just stop and think. If you had to guess, who has higher shrinkage problems, meaning theft? Is it the dollar store or is it BJ's? Is it Walmart or is it Target? A well-paid staff is less likely to steal from you. And that's a genuine factor that, somebody who's looking at the numbers, the retail or money ballers are figuring out, if we do this, this, and this, it'll cost us X, and if we don't, it'll cost us Y.
That when I did my college internship at Disney World in 1994, I was getting $5.60 an hour, and I worked fast food. I did, in fact, steal. I ate the food. You would be terminated if it was found out. But I did steal from them. But it was more because they were selling food. It was delicious, and I was hungry than whether or not I felt appreciated by the employer. I was just hungry, and it was good. The top 10
was
retailers.
Was the food good there when you worked there?
Oh, so good. Even the fast food. The top 10 retailers in the U.S., by the way, Albertsons Company, Lowe's, Target, CVS, the Home Depot, Walgreens, Costco, Kroger, Amazon, Walmart. I've never heard of Albertsons companies. They must be a parent.
Albertson is a supermarket.
No. Well, where are they? Never heard
Florida,
of them.
they're all over.
Huh.
I think more along the south than the
Apple is number 11, but
which is just astonishing. By the way, did you happen to see the post I put up on Thursday?
Yeah, about the Apple Store going away? Don't bet on the Apple Store? What was that about?
So just to refresh your recollection, that was a post from a Business Week story before Bloomberg bought them. The headline of this Business Week story from May 21st, 2001 was, "Sorry, Steve, here's why Apple stores won't work."
Man, I read that as your blog post from that week.
No. So the Apple aficionados won't get pissed at me because they all remember what a clusterfuck that story was. And Apple, on a per square footage basis, is the most successful retailer in America by double on a dollar per square foot basis. The closest retailer is Tiffany's, and they're like 2x
in terms of how much actual physical retail space they have and what their profits are per store.
How much revenue each store brings in on a per square footage basis. It's really just astonishing.
It's, this whole conversation about retail, and I'm looking at these top 10. I'm also thinking about who else makes a lot of money, and Home Depot and Lowe's are in there. There's something to be said.
So there's a reason for that. You understand why that's also they're one of the beneficiaries of the pandemic, because for the people who can't move, hey, I got to make my house more comfortable, whether that's new carpeting or fixing
everybody built a fire pit, a patio,
exactly,
an added room, whatever, renovated stuff for sure. So that's not normal. But what I was thinking when I was looking at that list is just how few family-owned, quote, mom and pop shops there are that are sporting goods, home repair hardware that are, and there's just so little that's left because it's all covered by the giants at this point. I mean, all you have now is mostly just restaurants. I mean, where is there an independent sporting goods store other than like on a college campus just because it sells Dartmouth or Syracuse University swag? And even then, I mean, it's just, and I don't know, and I think that's bad.
So
I think that's bad for society.
Goods chains, Modell's, Dick's, who else is left? They all seem to be part of a bigger. So Nike has their own shops.
It seems bad. Is it bad because I'm nostalgic to know the owner and the people who work at the store that I shop at, and that money goes back into my community? I mean, it seems like it's bad economics. It seems like it's bad for sustainability, for sure. But it certainly is cheaper for everybody, for consumers, it would seem.
Do you know Tom Papa? Am I pronouncing
the comedian
his
Tom
name?
Papa?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He does this bit that I love about the good old days. He goes, the good old days are today. The good old days 50 years ago, they didn't have Advil. Imagine a world with no Advil. And he goes down a list of things, and he's like, the good old days, you step on a nail, you die. He just starts banging out like a dozen things. He goes, you live in the good old days. Back then, those were the bad old days. And, the rosy glow of nostalgia is pretty amusing. But once you put it into context, imagine a world where there is no Advil. Think about how often you just like, I need
Well, imagine a world where there aren't vaccines. Let's end on this, because I want to get your take on these vaccines, how effective that they have actually been, how quickly they were developed, and then rolled out in the United States of America. I keep looking at, and I'm sure somebody's written this, but the pandemic was handled the worst in the U.S. of developed, wealthy countries.
Right.
But the vaccine rollout was handled the best. Now, to be fair, the virus came from another country, and we made the vaccines in this country, so I think there's something to be said for that. But still, all of these other countries that handled the outbreak far worse are not able to get their folks vaccinated. 50% of adults now vaccinated as of when we're talking right here on whatever day it is, Tuesday.
And there's some crazy stats, and I'm looking for one of them right now. I think infections have fallen 89%. I think that's the
But the vaccine is such an amazing
that's
miracle
how effective it is
of
that
a
the
drug.
vaccines have fallen that much, number one. And number two, here's the number I'm looking for. And this is already old data, which is kind of crazy, but let me pull this up. New COVID-19 cases in the U.S. are down more than 89% from their peak in January. It's the lowest level since the low last summer in June.
That's great.
That's the percentage of COVID-19 tests in the U.S. are now, positive tests are now 2.4%. It's the lowest number since the pandemic, and hospitalizations are down 81%. It's just, so the numbers are shocking. And when you look at globally, there are now 1.7 billion doses of the vaccine have been given, according to Bloomberg, in 176 countries, about 28.8 million doses a day. In the U.S., 288 million doses have been given, and we've been pretty stable at about 1.75 million doses. So we're a nation of 300 and let's call it 30 million people. You have, if the admitted number or the official number of people who have had COVID was somewhere around 35 million, it's pretty safe to say, and I wrote this up a couple of months ago, it's pretty safe to say that it's probably triple. It's probably 100 million people had COVID, which means that those people should have some basic antibodies and some form of immunity. And then you look at, 100 million people are fully vaccinated. Everybody over 65, it's like 90-something% is vaccinated. Half the adults in the country have received at least one dose. You look around and the virus has fewer and fewer people it can get a foothold in, to mix metaphors.
Yeah.
And this is why we want to encourage people to take vaccines. And by the way, before there were vaccines, you had to wear masks to stop the spread of this airborne virus. And the science on this, despite what some of the dumbest people in the world keep insisting, including the idiot senator who's a dentist, who will go without names, is that masks reduce the amount of respiratory expulsion that you have, and they reduce what you inhale. So when we have a virus and no cure and no prevention, masks are our first line of defense. Yeah. When we have a vaccines reduce the number of targets that this can do. By the way, Bloomberg, I just did the form online. You want to come in, you have to provide a proof of vaccination.
Oh, to go to work at Bloomberg News?
Right. And if you want to go into the building.
Well, employers are going to almost overwhelmingly employ. It's also a way to weed
Can I
out
tell you something?
Candidates, I would imagine.
My philosophy of investing is all evidence-based and reality-based. If one of my employees says, listen, I don't want to get vaccinated, I'm going to say to him, you have to explain to me why you don't want to get vaccinated. Mm-hmm. And, the argument you had 6 months ago that this is a new vaccine and we have no idea what it's going to do. Well, now that 1.7 billion shots have been given worldwide, that argument is gone. And so I'm not going to fire someone who refuses to take a vaccine. But let me tell you, I look at that person and say, I'm disappointed to learn that their judgment is not that great.
Well, I'd love
we're in a judgment business.
Record that conversation. If it ever happens, I doubt it will.
What?
I'm sure your employees are all going to be vaccinated.
We're coming up on 40 people. Statistically, I think, what's the percentage of anti-vaxxers in the country? 3, 4, 5%, something like that, maybe even more.
Yeah, but you can't add.
I'm just doing the math, man. That's 1 to 2 people.
I mean, how many QAnon people you got working there? For God's sake.
We're an all QAnon shop.
All QAnon shop.
We're big believers.
Is this national? Or is it just where I live?
Did you say QAnon? I thought you said NASDAQ Qs. I misunderstood you. We're a QQQ shop, not a QAnon shop.
There's a new real estate company where I live. It's called Q something. Have you seen this anywhere? Is it just local? I'm like, they have to be playing on that, the popularity of that letter, and probably
it's you hit a certain point where I don't know if you ever had this experience. When I wrote my book, I felt like, and I know I've said this to you before, but I'm going to repeat it. All right, we've closed this chapter. We've put this aside. Now we're done. And now that I've solved how the crisis happened, we can all move on with our lives to the next topic. And yet people still want to argue about it. And I'm the wrong guy to argue with because I just machine gun them down with data and information and facts. And it's like, listen, I'm not looking to convince you. You're clearly an idiot. I'm not going to convince you. I'm looking that everybody else around I want to convince. So I'm just going to machine gun you with data, and that's that. I'm not going to convince an anti-vaxxer that they should take a vax. There are people who have written how-tos. Here's how to get someone who's an anti-vaxxer. And the answer is the Socratic method, and you lead them, and you never tell them. You just ask them questions, and you lead them on a wild goose chase so they can get to the answer themselves. I just say, if you don't have to be vaccinated, but your kids can't go to other people's kids' doctors or schools or whatever, you're an outcast, you're a pariah, and I'm very comfortable with that. Don't fly in the same plane with me. Don't go to Disneyland with me. Stay the fuck off the subway. I just want nothing to do with people whose, I told you the book, The Heretics of Science.
Yeah.
So the author embedded himself with all these different crazy groups, the Holocaust deniers, the flat earthers, just one crazy group after another. And the takeaway from all these study of these different groups was that these people were shockingly normal and sane, but they had one fundamental thing that was a little bit off in their worldview. And hey, when you're aiming a rocket at Mars, and if you're just off by a couple of inches, by the time you get to Mars, you miss by millions of miles. And it's the anti-vaxxer group seems to be, there's like a tiny thing wrong with their fundamental view of the world. And when you extrapolate it out to, and that's why the measles vaccine causes autism, it's like, you didn't get the message about that whole thing being with a scam, and the Lancet had to withdraw the publication, and the doctor who wrote that bullshit was fired and stripped of his medical license. You missed the replay that said the touchdown was no good. Your score is wrong, don't you? But I know I'm never going to convince those people. I just want nothing to do with them.
I feel like you were one of the first people to talk about that study or studies that took conspiracy theorists and brought them into a room, focus group, and with a bunch of experts. The experts gave them all the arguments they needed, and they left holding their conspiracy theories even more
double down.
Right. So somebody just wrote, I forget who it was, something debunking that study and saying that's not necessarily.
Send me that. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I can't find it. I thought you would have heard about it, but
no, I haven't heard about that.
Because it'd be great if that were wrong, right?
Out of the loop lately.
It would be great if that were wrong. All right, I'll let you go. I appreciate it very much. Love talking to you. Thanks for giving me so much of your time, sir.
My pleasure. Anytime. I got a call to make before someone runs out the door at 5:30. But everything else good?
Yeah. I'll press stop there. You don't have to hear our personal catch-up conversation. That's just between Barry and I. Barry Ritholtz, at Ritholtz, everybody, at Ritholtz. Subscribe to his daily news email. I love his top reads. It's just basically all the things that he's reading, like 10 stories or so. It's great. And his blog, where he writes, as well as listen to his podcast, Masters in Business, on the Bloomberg Network, anywhere you get your podcasts. All right, now it's time to get to my conversations, my phone call with Bill B. in D.C. Bill, a former caller of the old show. Everybody always loved his calls. I loved his calls, loved his perspective, loved his knowledge and passion for history and politics and religion and so much more. He's a great guy. He actually is a businessman. He owns parking garages in Washington, D.C. He's a D.C. animal. He's on the cocktail circuit, or at least
He's in the fire pit circuit because he has a fire pit at his house right there in D.C., though. And just a great guy. Love talking to him. So I reached out. I called him. We talked about a bunch of things. And here it is right now. He's on Twitter, by the way. If you like him, say hi to him. A longtime listener and subscriber, my friend Bill Boyle on Twitter at Bill B in D.C. Where we start, I think we're talking about the history of the Jewish state is where I'm starting here with Bill. Just easy, nice, easygoing way to get us off the ground.
Had to fight against the British. I mean, the Irgun were the Zionists fighting in British Palestine to create a Jewish state. And so, like, the Jewish state goes in many ways back to the Irish Republican Army in Ireland. And a lot of the early folks came from Ireland and helped set up that state. And as of today, the Irish government is considering expelling the Israeli ambassador and imposing sanctions on Israel over the de facto annexation of Palestinian land.
Wow.
So over 150 years or so, 140 years, there's been a kind of complete reversal of where they stood. You know, the Israeli state was a darling of Irish radicals, partly because they were fighting the British, of course. And now Ireland can't run away from Israel fast enough because they see Israel doing what was done to them.
You know, Benjamin Netanyahu's a terrible, terrible person, criminal, corrupt, racist. Yep. I mean, he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
And he is in all kinds of legal trouble. And you can never prove that a government's leader starts a war or creates a military conflict to distract from his domestic issues. But we always like to guess it. And this guy had just almost lost an election. They were fighting for power in their parliamentary system. He probably was going to lose power and then possibly be indicted. The parallels between the Netanyahu family and the Trump family are eerie, but in terms of the similar situations. But boy, I can't say enough bad things about Benjamin Netanyahu, Bill.
Yeah, he's a terrible guy. And you know, as you and I have talked before, though, these sorts of things are systemic, right? It's that the system itself is allowing him to exist in the way that he does. Israel as a state, its politics used to be fairly socialist and radical, really. And over time, it has become a pretty conservative state that is a very, very good place if you're into right-wing politics. Part of which, by the way, comes from the inflow of Russian Jews from the 70s onward, right? You get the center of mass of Israel's politics as it became less of a sort of European, socialist state. It was people from the Eastern Bloc coming in there that pulled its politics to the right.
I didn't realize that.
Because they were more. Yeah, I mean, so Netanyahu, though, is like, he is a symptom of a state that has gotten sort of sick, right? The logic of it is, you know, you have people who from the Eastern Bloc who slowly change the politics to the right, A. B, you know, Israelis are no more immune to going for their own personal interests than anyone else. And so lots of people in Israel are quite willing to ignore, pretend it doesn't exist, that it is becoming more and more like an apartheid state.
Jimmy Carter, former president Jimmy Carter, that one, called Israel an apartheid state years ago. And that's why I think it's not a radical thing to say. I mean, Jimmy Carter gives everybody else cover. He's not a radical.
Sure. Well, and I mean, Pete, I come from an environment, a political environment that was very, very, very pro-Israel, right? I mean, I used to be very knee-jerk pro-Israel because I looked around the neighborhood it was in, that it was a real democracy that was doing it seemed like it was doing the best it could to try to do things right by the Arabs in Israel. But as time has gone on, those positive things Israel was doing have slowly been pushed by the wayside. And Israel now is a state based upon keeping a good chunk of the people who happen to live in that state from voting or from having any power and from taking their land away. Right. I mean, it's the slow roll annexation of Palestinian land. Yeah. And I mean, the Palestinians, by the way, are up there in world history with, say, the Germans or the Italians in like going through a period of absolutely awful political leadership, right? Like the Palestinian leadership has almost universally been absolute dog shit.
Yeah.
But they don't deserve to be treated, like Israel is, instead of trying to deal with that anymore, Israel is just taking advantage of that now.
Well, Israel makes it hard for the Palestinians to create a more responsible representative government, and in many ways, but at the same time, the corruption of Hamas. I mean, I can never get away from, when we're talking about the Middle East, religion. I just always have such a hard time with. I know it's not even really an interesting argument, because who cares what I think about religion? I mean, these people are fervently religious, both the Israelis increasingly, according to polling, and the Palestinians forever. And they're led by religious radicals overwhelmingly. They're not led by. I used to think Israel was far more secular, but it's become far more religious. I'm not saying it's not still secular, but I can't divorce myself from the fighting over the history of the creation of their religions, and it's just their holy lands. It's just tough for me.
Right. I mean, here's the thing that you should always remember that sociologists say when they're talking about religion or anything else, and it is culture always wins. In other words, and you saw a thing on Twitter the other day that I was arguing with somebody a little bit about this. When somebody says like Christians are terrible, just to take the example of the religion you and I come from, if you look at the basic tenets of Christianity as laid out by Jesus Christ in the Bible, it's an almost entirely positive thing. Love your fellow, love your neighbor, the least among you are the worth the most, all of that stuff. Islam, same thing. Buddhism, same thing. Confucianism, same thing. The core tenets are often quite good. I mean, there is no religion out there with any large number of adherents that's like stomp on the testicles of your enemies, right? That's not a religious precept.
Oh, if there were, I would join up right away. That sounds
exactly. But what happens is that people's interests and their biases control for it. So evangelicals in the United States are often awful and don't resemble like the message that they purport to believe in any real way. Same thing in Israel, same thing in the Middle East. I mean, so the point is that, you're having the situation you have there is that the diverging interests of the cultural groups in that part of the world are going to clash, and the religion will be bent to suit, right? And that's how it works. I mean, Islam at its beginning, right, is a mix of Zoroastrianism from Persia, of Judaism from the Arabian Peninsula, of Christianity from Byzantium, and then a couple of like sort of cults in the middle of all of that. And the original Muslims were super pro-Byzantine, which is a thing that like almost nobody knows. Like Islam was a reaction to what was going on in the world at the time, but in a really pro-Greek Byzantine way, right? So if you look at it like, this is some different thing, it's not. Islam and Christianity are almost exactly the same thing. There were Jewish kings in Arabia up until the advent of Muhammad.
Yeah,
right?
These
are core things.
They really are all so very similar in so many more ways than they are different if you zoom very far out. And
there's sort of three models. There's sort of three major models, right? The Chinese one is almost like ancestor worship, bureaucratic. The Indian model is like really syncretic. Like you bring Christianity to Islam, they're like, oh yeah, that guy's like Rama, boom, slide him into our whole huge pantheon. But if you're talking about like Islam, Judaism, Marxism for that matter, right? Christianity, these Western philosophical ways of looking at the world, they're really totalizing, right? It's like there's real absolutes that have to be accepted. And the craziest thing is like the differences between, say, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity on a day-to-day level are really small. Like ethically, they believe all the same things.
Yeah.
But part of their structure is really totalizing. You either right or wrong, and that's it. And why is that? Because they get infected with a cultural thing, right? The Islam is the outburst of Arab nationalism, early Arab nationalism, and early Arab culture, as the Persians and the Greek Romans on either side of them sort of collapsed, right? So then the religion becomes like there's a reason that even though Arabia had access to Latin and Greek and Persian, the Quran is written in Arabic, right? There's a reason for that. It's culture. It's culture.
Right.
And
culture.
so the religion is, the religion is important, right? Although I would argue that, we talk about religious wars, like you look at Buddhism, excuse me. In Burma, Buddhists are like massacring, raping, and killing Muslims.
Yeah, it's terrible.
The Rohingya, right? But it's funny because back in the day,
I don't think it's funny at all.
No. I mean, it's not abusing funny, strange funny.
I know.
And back in the day, people used to say to me like, "Oh, all these Western religions are terrible, but Buddhists are really great." And I knew enough of my history to be like, no, that's not really always been true. In fact, often they were awful. And now, sure enough, we're seeing it again. So it's not about like the religious stuff is just a patina that sits on top of all the cultural impulses and malignities that are out there.
I don't know what you just said, those last few words, but let me get back to, I want to ask you about domestic politics. I want to just get your hot take on Joe Biden having a 62% approval rating, despite what I would characterize as his super old guy behavior and low energy.
So I would say this.
And gaffe after gaffe, which, they aren't really gaffes so much anymore, but him, saying while driving the truck with the reporter the one day.
Yeah, that was a little weird, right?
Yeah, just stupid. And then the next day he's at the Coast Guard Academy and he's like begging him to laugh at his jokes. Like, are you serious? He's been in politics and a very important person for way too long. It's like he's phonied it in.
But you know what, Pete? They're working their asses off. I mean, I know people in that administration.
Yeah.
They are absolutely working their asses off. And so is he, by the way.
No doubt. No doubt.
He is actually really doing the job. And Trump changed everything, right? One of the things he changed is that a sort of, softball gaffe, some weird comment made at a truck event. 5 years ago, we'd all be going, what the fuck?
Yeah.
After Trump, it's like, oh, he did not, threaten to kill the journalist there. So it's not a big deal.
Well, it was very Trumpian.
It was a little Trumpian. I'll give you that. I think it was a little Trumpian. I think it was weird. But also remember this, like, Biden has been in politics for 40 or 50 years.
Yeah.
He's also been a gaffe machine for 40 or 50 years.
And by the way, just the idea is words and actions. And Donald Trump's words matched his actions. Terrible. He talked about the press, journalists as enemies, and he treated them that way. And now
and he believed it.
Yeah, and there's news come out that they had Barbara Starr of CNN's emails, and I mean the kind of things that the Obama and Bush administration did before him to journalists. And I shouldn't compare those two, but Obama did some bad things, or his administration did, I think. But Joe Biden's actions and words are just so much different. He can say something stupid, but as long as the reporters are being treated well by Jen Psaki and have access to her, they're pretty happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Biden administration. The reason is
they get to fly on the plane. Remember how crazy they didn't allow reporters to fly on the plane with the Secretary of State, and I don't.
Sure, because instead of the Trump people's attitude was that the government was working for them, not that they were working for the government. Yeah. So they didn't have any sense,
especially the lawyers.
Especially right, and so they had no sense of like, hey, people need to know what their government's doing, so you got to bring the press along so they can tell them. The Biden people still have that idea of like, even if the relations with the press are frosty or fraught at times, it's still the press is there to do a job that serves the nation. The Trump people saw the press as a thing that got in the way of them looting the till or making some deal that they were going to make money on,
and also also a prop.
And exactly. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, what they really wanted. I mean, I spent a lot of time studying, Soviet Union and communist countries back in the day, and really, what the Trump people really wanted was what like the Soviets had, where the press was there to glorify the great leader, and that was it. And it's such a weird thing. I mean, it's certainly not anything I expected to have in America in my life. But that's what they were doing. I mean, it was an authoritarian state, and the first rule of authoritarian states is you got to control the press and make them kiss your ass, and their only job is to either support the revolution or you block them out of everything and lock them out.
By the way, I mean, we're seeing that throughout the world. Are you following what's happening in Belarus? Am I saying it right? Belarus or Belarus?
Belarus, yes. Belarus, Lukashenko, that air hijacking, which I mean,
crazy,
that's got to be
crazy out of a movie. Crazy.
Yeah. So there's this whole bullshit thing where people are comparing it to when the U.S. stopped a plane going to Bolivia.
Oh yeah, right? Evo Morales. My brother sent me did that. He made that comparison.
Yeah. Here's the thing, right? Yes, the U.S. did that. The U.S. did that by like picking up the phone, calling the air control of that country and saying, we want that plane to land. And they told the plane to land. What the Belarusians did was had 4 KGB agents. By the way, the Belarusians still call their secret police the KGB, which tells you everything you need to know about, their mentality. They had 4 KGB agents on the plane who said that there was a bomb in the plane. And then Minsk sent the MiG-29, and the plane was almost out of their territory. And the MiG-29 escorted, quote unquote, the plane back into a Belarusian airport. Yeah. I mean, they literally had
Minsk being the Belarusians,
the capital of Belarus,
the Lukashenko.
Right? Lukashenko, right? And so they literally, though, claimed there was a bomb on the plane. I mean, this isn't a state act of, hey, we want to stop this plane and see if there's a fugitive on it, because the U.S. at least could say, hey, Edward Snowden broke laws in the United States very clearly, right? This guy didn't break any laws. This guy was just a journalist they don't like. And so they literally called in a bomb threat and then threatened the plane with being shot down. I mean, it's a really intense,
the airline.
Thing.
Yeah, the airline is an Irish airline, Ryanair.
Ryanair, yeah.
And it's just like, what were they thinking? What were they thinking?
Well,
I mean, I know what they're thinking, but it's just a long game, and it's clearly sanctioned by Putin. And
of course. Oh, I think it's almost to show Putin that they mean business. I think that's what it was about. Lukashenko is trying to maintain his position and not get subsumed by the Russian state. So he's got to show that he is just as much of a norm violator as Vladimir is in Moscow. And there's a very weird personal thing going on there that Lukashenko used to play this game of balancing the West off against Russia.
Yeah, I was reading about that.
Right. So then they had their color revolution that so far at least has failed. And then he had nowhere else to go but to Putin. So now he has to he's got to, it's like a gang. He's got to be as vicious and nasty as the leader of the gang, or, why do they need him? Right. And so it's in the larger picture, this is again a great example of how norms are breaking down steadily on things that were just no one even thought and it would be crazy enough to do 10, 15 years ago. And honestly, I look at the way these norms are breaking down, and to me, I see it as like a slow slide towards some sort of conflict. I do. I just don't, because what are the incentives for Putin and Lukashenko to pull back and say, okay, hold on.
Well,
we need to chill out.
Yeah. I mean, the incentives are economic and threats to power, and the idea that, those aren't incentives. Those are the chess game of geopolitics of these authoritarian leaders, and you're talking about Russia and Belarus.
But we can't, we have sanctioned the crap out of Russia already.
Yep.
And the degree to which we can squeeze them more is limited.
Sarah Kendzior was complaining on her show Gaslit Nation that Alexei Navalny gave a list of people that needed to be sanctioned and sent it, to the Americans, to the American president, and they haven't gone far enough. I have no idea about that, but
yeah. So you have to think about when you do sanctions like that, how far do you go, and how far do you go when you go that far? How much does it benefit you, right? We don't really know, and Sarah doesn't know, and honestly, I don't know what kind of internal jockeying the U.S. intelligence services see happening within Russia, right? There's a lot going on under the hood over there about which industrialists would be willing to jump which way, for instance, right? If Putin got weak, and do you end up, when Putin falls, do you end up with a Shoigu, who's the defense minister and an absolute lunatic, or do you end up with somebody else who is not going to be such a lunatic? And in that situation, Putin's not getting any younger. Apparently he has MS. I would just be hesitant to roundly condemn, they're not doing X. if you don't really know what's kind of going on under the surface there. And with the Trump administration, I didn't trust them. With the Biden folks, they clearly cannot stand Putin, right? I mean, Putin tried to destroy Biden's remaining living son. So if you have some idea that the Biden people are like getting weak-kneed about fucking with the Russians, you need to have a drink and sit down.
I never thought of that. Do you think that Joe Biden sees Vladimir Putin that way and what he did to his son in terms of leaking information and all kinds of things about Hunter Biden? I don't know if you can describe exactly what he did, but do you really think that? I mean, that Joe Biden.
Put it this way: I'm an Irishman of a certain age with a son who I adore.
I know, but
Joe Biden is my dad's generation.
Yeah,
those guys would crawl
fiercely
over
loyal.
Broken glass with a baseball bat to kick the shit out of anybody who messes with their kids. And particularly having had so much tragedy in his family. Now, I will say this. I think Biden is not controlled by that. But anyone who thinks that guy sits in a meeting discussing sanctions in Russia and he's going like, well, maybe we're being too hard on the Russians. That's fucking crazy. That's crazy.
Well,
That's not what's happening.
Let me get back to my I don't know where we went off, but what do you think of the approval rating of Joe Biden at 62%?
I think he's doing a good job. It's that simple. We're at 50% inoculated in this country already. The economy is coming back. He does not do crazy shit. He is a safe pair of hands who is trustworthy. And people are seeing their lives getting better and the economy getting better. And, weren't you tired, desperately tired of waking up in the morning and turning on the news going like, what the fuck is going to come up that happened after?
No, I couldn't wait. It was exciting. It didn't direct. Yeah, I like, and I also, sometimes I'd take a couple hours off in the middle of the day and then I'd go light up Twitter or whatever and I'd see crazy and I get addicted to it. I loved it.
Oh, really? Seriously?
Yeah, I love the chaos.
I sat there.
No, but I'm joking. But it also, it gave me. I think it probably raised my blood pressure for 4 years. It gave me a sense of anxiety. What's next? And now when I'm thinking about it, I think I'm just overcompensating because I have, like everybody, a kind of post-traumatic stress, lowercase in every way. But just this idea that every day you worried that something crazy was going to happen, including potentially some kind of military conflict against us or against somebody else, more likely. Although he always did seem to cool his jets when it came to. The one surprising thing is that he didn't start more wars. He didn't drop more bombs. He didn't attack more countries.
It's funny because I've always seen him as ultimately a coward. And my biggest concern was not that we were going to attack somebody else. My biggest concern was that somebody else was going to attack us, and he was going to in a really vital interest.
Yeah, but he did. He did.
Let it happen.
He did whack that Iranian general. That was ridiculous. That was a really stupid thing to do.
Honestly, Iran's ability to fuck with us is a lot less than people would have you think.
It would seem they fired back and hit one of their own passenger planes.
Exactly.
And I laugh, but the truth is that destroyed the credibility with their own people. Like,
that's right.
It was right. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it totally destroyed their credibility, but it certainly made them pause and go, "Oops."
No,
maybe
but
next
the rap
time we don't
on
try to do an all goal.
The rap on. See the way I talk. The rap on Iran, in terms of foreign policy experts that I talk to, is always been about when the American president intervenes, says something, it unifies Iranian factions that are at odds with each other. And so that was the conventional wisdom. So when Trump whacked that guy, you're like, oh my God, they're going to come for us. I interviewed 7 people in a day about that, and nobody disagreed at all, including Trita Parsi. And everybody's wrong. Everybody was wrong.
Well,
and it's potentially because they shot down their own plane. Honest to God.
Right. And also, like, here's the deal. Iran had already been attacking us for a long time. I don't even think necessarily I didn't shed any tears over Soleimani getting killed. I thought
nor did I. Don't get me wrong. He's a monster. Right. No,
but the way they did it is they had him killed at the Baghdad airport in ways that made it super, super obvious the U.S. did it. And that was pure Trump right there, right? He was punching somebody who couldn't really punch him back that hard, and was doing it in a way so that he could like get some John Cena machismo out of it, right? And that was just that's Trump all over, right? Trump, when it came to China, was like pissing his pants every time he talked to Xi, or with Putin, like fawning over him, pulling him aside and having little tete-a-tetes with him in Helsinki. I mean, Trump is a coward. And my biggest fear back then was that, China would make a grab for Taiwan and the U.S. would just shrug and let it happen. And that, by the way, people will go, oh, well, that would be good. We don't have a war. No, that would be unbelievably destabilizing and would lead to a bigger war later, right?
Well,
and that's what Trump was.
I keep wanting to go back to domestic stuff. I love talking foreign policy and history with Bill Boyle, but do you think that I was listening to, I don't know, some analysis that I trusted. I can't even remember what anything is. It all gets blurred in my brain, but that there's a possibility that the Senate was going to find a way to pass a major infrastructure bill. Of course, the issue here is that you don't have enough senators to vote for this, and then you have the filibuster, and Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin aren't going for it. But now I'm hearing increasingly that it's actually likely that we might get a giant infrastructure bill passed. And what are you hearing and what are you thinking? Because that would be the kind of, I think, game changer that would show up in people's lives that might help Democrats save the midterm elections, although I really haven't looked at the map. I haven't studied it. I don't know what's happening. So
I honestly always thought the infrastructure bill was going to happen, whether the Dems pushed it through reconciliation or whether the GOP came around.
And not all infrastructure bills are equal in terms of the impact that they have on people's lives and then politics, which is perception. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like a $200 billion one is not like a $3 trillion one or whatever.
Right. And I think we're talking more like $1 trillion or $2 trillion. Right. I mean, I think that's going to happen. And I think that the deal is that for Republican senators, they're not stuck in some little House district that went 75% for Trump. Right. They're stuck. They're having to run statewide. And if you're running statewide and you're a senator, it's easy to take credit for parts of that. It's easy. So there's the incentive structure is set up that, people like Shelley Moore Capito or Wicker or whoever, even though they're pretty conservative, if you're a West Virginia Republican senator, hell yes, you want an infrastructure bill. 100%. Yeah. That's how Robert Byrd stayed there for 1 billion years and was incredibly popular.
Yeah, that was during earmarks, which was a different game.
Well, and earmarks are coming back. So the earmarks are returning. I don't know if you knew that. And it's a huge thing because it will incentivize all these folks.
I've heard that, but in a traditional fashion?
It's about 80% of what it was. I mean, it's essentially the same thing, except that back in the day, it was really opaque. Right. You didn't know who was asking for what and what the quid pro quos were that were built into it. The way it is now, you're going to know who asked for an earmark, and it won't be hidden away in Dan Rostenkowski's bottom drawer of his desk. so that in and of itself changes things in a good way.
When is that happening?
If it hasn't happened already, it's happening.
Did you hear Joe Manchin's wife got a plum job from the Biden administration?
I did know that. I don't remember which one it is, but that doesn't surprise me.
It's like, I just want to be clear. I get how politics works. I get how office politics works. I get how life works. I'm a realist. And I'll give Joe Biden and the people of West Virginia whatever they want. Whatever they want, Bill.
Exactly. And by the way, Manchin, Democrats give Manchin so much shit. And I'm like, guys, what's that stupid term in baseball? It's like some acronym for like someone who is worth X number of games a year. Joe Manchin is winning a seat, and he'll probably win it again if he runs again, that no other Democrat can win. We do not have a majority without Joe Manchin. So like the guy, by the way, is really definitely a Democrat, but he's a Democrat in a really tough state who wants to keep winning that seat for Democrats. So he's got to do what he's got to do. Does it annoy me? Do I wish that he was taking bigger risks at times? Sure. But Democrats freaking out about him, it's nuts. I mean, the senator being pissed out is Sinema, because Sinema is not nearly in as tough a situation.
I disagree.
And she's actually,
I disagree because Joe Manchin could do all kinds of things and make the people. I mean, the governor there is acting more progressive than Joe Manchin is on the idea of economic stimulus. It's the same politics, isn't it?
Yeah, but the governor can get away with that because he's a Republican, super hardcore Republican. And so he's that guy who, it's Nixon going to China for its justice, I think is the governor over there.
Yeah.
And he can get away with that because I know people in West Virginia politics, and they all Republicans, and they look at Manchin and they're like, that guy's an unbelievable genius because we can't touch him. And that Senate seat is solid gold. And Manchin's other problem, by the way, for Manchin, if he is not the key vote on some big things for Democrats, he'll vote with the Democrats almost every single time.
Right.
Politically, he cannot be the guy. Right.
That's power.
It's right. What it is that he becomes the poster child for every Republican moral panic that they want to freak out about. And he can't afford that. He can't afford to be that guy. If there were two more Democrats in the Senate, they'd be passing a lot of these things, and Manchin would be able to vote for it without having to worry about it because he would not be the ultimate vote that passed them.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, I'm just saying these things are things. I know they're going to get demagogued, and the right wing media is so powerful, but they are things that are going to make West Virginians' lives so much better. I mean,
that's why infrastructure is going to get through, but. Again.
So your analysis and what you're hearing is that it is going to get through the Senate. They're going to go around the filibuster because you're not going to have enough Republicans. I know, you might have a few.
I mean, here's what it's going to come down to, right? Either enough Republicans are going to come along that they pass some sort of negotiated bill, or the Democrats are going to do it through reconciliation and get a lot of what they wanted anyway. And Republicans are going to then be in the position, these Republican senators in states that are purple are going to be in the position of not having delivered any of it. Right. And I got to tell you something. If Biden's approval rating is floating on this like 60 or 58% during the midterms, I don't see a Democratic bloodbath happening in the House or the Senate. In fact, I think that they could actually do pretty well. So, the conventional wisdom is that you always lose seats in the midterms. I'm not at all sure that's right this time. I think it's really hard for Democrats, particularly in the House, but it's not hard to see the Democrats doing much better than people expect.
All right. It's been, 30 minutes. What else? Last thing. What do you want to talk about? What do you want to tell people about? What story you're following that you think people should follow? What narrative do you want to spin about a thing?
The narrative that everyone talks about Trump and Russia and how his administration and his team was colluding with the Russians. But I think that is kind of missing the forest for that particular tree. And what I'm talking about is another example of this happening. And I know of others similar, including developments in Vietnam where they were trying to push a bunch of business to a Trump-friendly businessman and pressuring the Vietnamese government, for one. But the one that really jumps out at me is a story that just came out in the last week or two. And do you remember the almost coup against King Hussein of Jordan a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, I listened to something long form about that. It's crazy.
Right. Well, so it's his half brother who had, the guy didn't have to do any work, basically, right? He could roll around and be the Hashemite wannabe in Jordan, and everybody would love him because, he didn't do anything. So you couldn't blame him for anything, but you could go and assume that he was going to make everything better, right? But this guy was smart enough for decades to just chill out, live like a royal, and get all these accolades that he never earned. While his half brother, King Hussein, actually ran the country and did all the work and had all the difficulties. Well, right at the end of the Trump administration and up until March of this year, suddenly it was discovered that guy was colluding with Jared Kushner's people and with MBS in Saudi Arabia. And they were really, really trying to overthrow King Hussein of Jordan. And it was all tied into, again, this sort of mirage of a deal that would end all deals in the Middle East. And it included, for instance, that Jordan would give up its rights to East Jerusalem, which is that they are the Hashemite kings who have power in East Jerusalem, and literally the religious backing for them ruling comes from their mentorship of, not mentorship's the wrong word, but They have like an official religious role in East Jerusalem. If they lose that, then they lose like the main reason culturally why they are the kings of Jordan.
Right.
But this coup was going to strip that. It was going to strip most of the positions that Jordan had taken on, if there's a final settlement, Jordan and or the Palestinians get X amount of land, right? All that was going to get stripped away. And of course, King Hussein of Jordan would never be that stupid, because you would destroy Jordan to take a deal that was so in favor of Israel or Saudi Arabia. So what they tried to do was foist him out in favor of his dumb half brother. Now, why is Jared Kushner in the middle of all this? You tell me. It was incredible self-own for American policy. Jordan's been our bosom stabilizing ally for 50 years.
So there's reporting on that Jared Kushner somehow.
Jared Kushner was involved in it, yes.
Because so Jared Kushner is very good friends with the leader of the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia and the leader of Israel, who slept in his race car bed when Jared was a little boy.
That's right.
Exactly. And so he is going to do the bidding of the interests, which are sometimes in conflict, but sometimes not, between Israel and the Saudis when it comes to Jordan. And it was
Jordan just gets.
It was a massive failure. Like, it was really poorly done, that coup attempt.
But here's the deal, and this is my larger point relating to Russia and various other things.
Like our coup attempt, which is ongoing, I think is very elaborate.
Good point. Right. Exactly. But the point being that, like, these guys were doing this everywhere. Everything was transactional. American interest didn't mean shit to them. They saw it as like, what's good for us? I'm sure that if you're Jared Kushner, you're thinking, I'm going to have access to Saudi money for the rest of my life if I need, if I make this deal. Right. Their self-interest overrode everything. So in other words, like
that, by the way, is the definition of a certain kind of political or social ideology, that your self-interest is the only thing that matters. And it's right. Dumb because it catches up to you and you lose, and you end up in a sewer pipe being stabbed by your own people.
Maybe. I mean, let me put it this way.
That's true.
That is the government model of Russia. The Siloviki, the ex-KGB guys, that's how they run Russia. That is how. But hold on a second before you go into a geopolitical or history lesson. That's a lot of Americans. But it's different. It's different in that in the U.S. If you look back at big business, even in the 1960s, right, when the American banana companies were getting the U.S. government, or in the 30s, the American banana companies were pushing U.S. policy in certain directions, right? They were not
American policy then pushed the banana companies in a certain direction.
Well, right, exactly, and that's exactly my point. So what I'm saying is that back in the day, in the 30s, the banana companies in South America, whatever, they were not the government. They were outside forces trying to entice or push the government into doing what they needed or wanted. What's happened now, what happened with the Trump people is those scummy, malign big businesses were the government, right? There wasn't like a lobbyist standing there saying do X. It's the president's son, who has an official job in the White House, who is directing policy,
son-in-law, without
any compunction,
purely
to serve his business interests or other larger interests. So, and that is how Russia works. That's how Belarus works. That's how China works. And that's the challenge of our time, basically. And I think people need to see the Trump people that way, instead of seeing each thing in isolation. See it as a system.
Yeah. I tried often to, when it's been so long since I even argued with a Trumper. I don't have any in my life. Come on, if there's any out there, I'd love to talk to you. But that was always the primary argument for me. I'm like, what do you think of a politician who appoints his kids to mayor, governor, whatever, Cuomo? I mean, it's always ugly. It's bad, right? No matter who it is, that's unethical.
Well, what's happening
nepotism
in America right
is
now,
terrible in politics, and
But what's happening right now is it's the alliance of sort of oligarchy with sort of internal nationalism, right? In all of these countries, it's the Han in China, it's white Americans of a certain sort of mindset in the U.S. It's Russians in Russia, right? Like it's basically a sort of folk nationalism. And these folks offer to cater to that nationalism as long as they're given power. And that's it. It's not that complicated. It's, we're in the situation where, the big capitalisms, communisms, socialisms of the 20th century have sort of faded away into, pure just totalizing nationalism about everything. I mean, it's why I've sat with Trump people and said similar things. Like, you understand, they were working with the Russians. You get that, right? And they go, well, yeah, but I don't really care. I mean, because the guy's delivering for me. And you're like, what are they delivering for you? Well, America was on the wrong track and the country's changing. And all of that is to say, white guys like me don't like the change. And so we'll put up with or accept super corrupt people because that's preferable to a multicultural society that we feel weak in.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
A good place to end as well. Bill B. in D.C., everybody. Bill Boyle, thank you so much. I love talking to you. Thanks, man.
Thanks, buddy.
There you go. There he goes. Billy B. William Boyle. Ladies and gentlemen, another great conversation with Bill. Always happy when he's available to talk. Missed his calls on the live show. Love to hear from you as well. If you're a longtime listener or subscriber and you'd love to talk to me and have it recorded, we don't have to play it, but it could be something that we play and we can learn about each other and we can learn more from you and your expertise and your background and your thoughts on things. You can always email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Hope to see you at tonight's Stand Up Happy Hour Hangout. That starts at 8 East on the Zoom. If you're a subscriber, you'll have access to the link. You'll get it emailed to you as well every day with a daily email that has the podcast in it, a couple words that I have put together, and always a vitamin N picture, a nature picture submitted by a listener and subscriber. So sign up now, get that email, hang out with us tonight, and thank you so much for your support. I love you, and if you're still listening, you're an amazing, kind, thoughtful person. Take it away, John Carroll.
Boy, you better stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering see them flee the scene of that experiment. If you stand up, all right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the dark.